Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Interchange with me, your host, Matthew Heineke. And today's guest is Kelly Dowd. She's a learning and development consultant from onespan, and she describes herself as being curiouser and furiouser. Her ideal future is less about achieving certain milestones than it is about finding new ways to spark creativity and use her imagination. She strives to be a lifelong learner, amused to others, and never be bored or settle. Her top three achievements are surviving and thriving after open heart surgery at a young age, having the guts to pursue acting fearlessly, and the judgment to quit when it no longer brought her joy, and being the only woman in a male improv troupe. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me. That was a very nice intro.
Thank you. So today's topics, we're going to talk about role-playing and sales as it pertains to learning and development.
Yes, indeed. So I have worked with salespeople for most of my career. And actually, my father is a salesman, lifelong salesman. And if you've ever trained salespeople, you know that they are a unique learning audience and they don't tend to love trainers. So I have found new approaches to training them, supporting them, and particularly I found a methodology to role play and role play coaching that I find to be very effective and works really well over Zoom, which with our remote environment. So it's an interesting beast. My dad wonders why I've chosen to work with salespeople, and I must admit I sometimes ask that question. But I have a deep respect and love for what they do and helping them to get better at it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think, I'm happy to hear more about the challenges and the differences working with salespeople. My father was actually a salesman or salesperson himself for many years. He worked for the Yellow Pages. So
Oh my goodness.
the ads in the Yellow Pages. Maybe some younger viewers out there might not even know what Yellow Pages
Yeah,
are.
so it's a book that has phone numbers. You used to have to memorize phone numbers. Now, if someone asks me someone's number, I don't know unless
Yeah,
it's mine, which is questionable sometimes.
yeah, you had to look up the phone number. And then
Right.
the giant book had the pages were yellow. That's why it was called the Yellow Pages. And they had advertisements for all the different businesses. So he
Wow.
traveled around. I'm from Utah, so he traveled around like Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, and would
So
sell these
truly
ads.
like a door-to-door salesman.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Similar to my dad, he's with Empire Carpet.
Oh,
And I always say when I'm talking to salesmen that my earliest memories of him in sales is I'm at the breakfast table and he's on the phone complaining about his crappy leads. And, for salespeople, it's not a good lead unless you are writing the check and in the room with them. So I can relate.
and yeah, it's interesting. My dad, he was a very outgoing, personable guy. I guess you have to be a salesperson.
Yes.
And myself, I was very introverted. But now later in life, I'm realizing you need to get out there and meet new people and kind of put yourself out there. So hopefully some of that
Yeah.
stuff rubbed off on me a little bit.
I think so, in my experience of you so far. It's interesting that you mentioned, how outgoing you need to be. I think with salespeople, one of the misconceptions that is made is, we're all trying to get away from this idea of the used car salesman and the checkered coat. Salespeople today can be highly emotionally intelligent because they're constantly interpreting behavior. And I think part of the reason that I was so drawn to working with salespeople in particular, because of my background, as you mentioned, in acting, which, as you also mentioned, I am no longer doing, very happy to have left. But it gave me a lot of skills that I discovered were very similar to what a salesperson does. So, for example, in acting, you have an objective that your character is playing. There's something they want out of someone else or that they want to achieve. And to get that objective, they're leveraging what we call tactics. So, one of the examples I always give is like Romeo and Juliet. If you're Romeo, your objective is to kiss Juliet. Your tactics are to climb a balcony, to say lovely things to her, to dress a certain way. So as a salesperson, they have objectives and they use tactics. And so many of the vocabulary I learned in acting and improv, I've used in sales, and I've discovered that over the years, it's become more acceptable to do so. So when I first started in my career, a recruiter told me never tell anyone that you used to be an actor or that your degree's in musical theater. And now it's absolutely my competitive edge point. And you'll see in many cities, there are, Second City will have a corporate focused improv training or sales focused improv. So it's become like an acceptable thing now, which is nice.
No, I've seen that. Yeah. And there was a lady here who used to run a organization called like Fearless Women or something like that. But she would teach
Oh,
improv for business women and really for anybody. But yeah, I think that's
so sorry about that. Of course, getting the little pop-ups there from Slack. Let me get out of there.
no
Yes.
problem.
And it's interesting you mentioned that because I have friends who, were college friends from theater that have now transitioned into using theater in their careers. Most of us are not in theater anymore. Sorry, Illinois Wesleyan, for the bad advertisement there. They do have some that are like Broadway stars, but the vast majority are corporate trainers and the like. So it's really a reasonable transition. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I think it makes sense. I mean, uh, when you're acting, I guess you're using those skills, especially improv. You have to kind of improv as you're speaking with the customer. You don't know how that customer is going to react or what kind of personality they have. Like you said,
Absolutely.
what's their emotional state. So that's very interesting. So yeah, tell me more about this role playing. How do you use role playing
Yeah.
to salespeople?
So most salespeople, I always say role play is a bit like kale. It's disgusting, but you have to do it to get better. And I think part of the reason role play is so painful is because it's awkward, it feels uncomfortable. And generally, you have a less tenured person working with a more tenured person. It's intimidating for them. So, what I try to do is really put some rules and framework in place with the role play. So, rather than just, hey, let's get together and talk out this scenario, we have a focus and we discover that focus by identifying patterns of opportunity from salespeople. So, ideally, what you would do is you would meet with so I work a lot with sales development reps who are, the front of funnel focused members of the team. And I'll meet with their manager. We'll talk through what is so and so working on, what are 3 areas of opportunity we see. And then when we do the role play, I'll meet with the person playing the decision maker first as well. So these debriefs are really essential. You don't want to just hop into a role play cold. Even if you email back and forth with different scenarios, look, we don't read emails. So you have to get a 15-minute call. I usually sneak attack it. I don't put it on the books because salespeople have no time for anyone. But if you call them, they're going to pick up their phone. And we talk through, hey, you're going to be role playing with Matt next week. And the focus of this call is relationship building. I'm going to instruct Matt that what I want you to do is get this caller to like and trust you. I don't care if you get into features and functions. I don't care if you do a pitch. Your main objective here is to get them to like you. So the salesperson has an objective, the decision maker has an objective. And usually I also use a theater technique where the decision maker has some sort of subtext. So it might be that we've done an RFP and you're our third vendor. We've already made a selection. It might be that they're actually, have already put in their notice and they're not really the decision maker anymore, but they're just taking this call. Something to give them something to work with, make them feel like this is more realistic. And that way, when they come into the call, it's just a richer experience. It's more real. It doesn't feel as silly. The other thing that I find is such an obvious tip, but seldom gets done, on a Zoom call, if you and I are coming into a Zoom call to role play, and we start out by having small talk for a while and then switch into banana phone mode, it feels very weird. So I instruct them that, when I usually come in, so I'm the moderator, and as soon as the salesperson joins, the decision maker joins, we're on. We're not starting with small talk. We're going into the scene, as we call it. And then, they have a certain amount of time for the call, and then we do coaching. And the coaching always starts with the same question, which is, to the role player who's, the one that is being coached, how did you feel that went? And then we let them talk about it, because generally people are pretty self-aware, and coaching is so much more impactful if you can let them come to their own conclusions about what might be better to do. And generally they get it right. And then we talk through how they might have done better. And then the improv rules that we use are that when you coach an improv, you don't want to say to an improviser, well, it would have been funny if you said this. Okay, but you didn't say it. It's improv. What we want to say to them instead is, you had an opportunity where you could have picked up on XYZ. You need to listen more for what your counterpart is saying so that you can build off of them. You want them, and this is like Sandler method training as well, if you're familiar with that, but it's
heard of them, yeah.
why Sandler method's all about the why. So rather than saying, here's a talk track that you should have said, that's me delivering you a line. I want you to learn why you should have said it. So we really focus on that in our coaching, and it's really impactful, and it's also a little bit less condescending, and it works better for the role player's personality style, because one of the flaws in the way many more senior salespeople train is they just say, here's what I would have said, here's what I would have done, use this script that I created. Well, if I'm using a script from a middle-aged white man, it's going to sound a little different coming from me. So maybe that isn't exactly right for me. I need to understand why he says that and adapt it to my language. So those are a couple of things we do, and we record the calls so we can, have them go back and listen. I can play it for their manager. And then the other key is the moderator. The person playing the decision maker should be focused on their role as the decision maker, not taking down coaching comments. So when you have a moderator, either a sales trainer, a manager, another salesperson, that person can just focus on the coaching. So you have 3 people. So like top tips, have a moderator, prep beforehand, and make sure that as soon as you get into the Zoom, you start the role play, and it'll be a lot less painful.
No, that sounds really cool. And those are great tips. So when you have this call, you said you have a moderator, a coach, somebody watching the call, or listening to the call, and then the person who's on the other one, who's playing the decision maker, is that another employee?
Yes. So you want to use, and this is a big part of where I see sales training as a little bit different than when I've worked in more of an operations or HR function. As I said, salespeople, they don't really want to listen to a sales trainer. And there was a time when I fought against that and tried to still be the one facilitating and in charge. And now I've learned that if the same message that I'm going to give comes from a senior salesperson, the junior salesperson it's just going to resonate more, because they're currently walking the walk. But where I can lend a hand is guiding that conversation, because I can use my knowledge of adult learning to steer things in the right direction. But we always use another employee, and we actually at our company have created what we call our bench. So our coaches go through training with me on it would be like a train the trainer, but we call it a coach the coach. And we talk through effective role play techniques. So we basically have like a little improv class where they go through techniques that are appreciated, things to focus on, the types of questions we want them to ask. We give them, okay, here's the type of objections we want you to be using for a very junior new person. Here's for someone who's been here for 6 months that we want to challenge a little bit. And we really take it very seriously. We work on these role plays to make them effective. And generally, I find that the decision maker gets something out of it as well, because it's a sneaky way for me to give them training. So that if I were just to say, let me give you my top tips, they would be rolling their eyes and checking their email. But if I'm coaching a sales development rep who's playing, themselves, and the regional sales manager is in the call, they're going to learn something, and they won't feel like I'm condescending to them. So it's like stealthy learning.
No, it makes sense. I think, you're putting them in a situation that's as real as it can get. And that's really the only way that you learn. You don't learn by somebody standing and talking to you for 8 hours. I mean, you might learn a little bit, but
Right.
that's a lot of information to jam inside of your head, and then wake up the next day and start using it.
Right.
It's you should just practice what you do, just like a professional athlete. A professional athlete practices the same basic skills over and over again. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're doing.
Absolutely. And the question that will come up is if we have call recording software, which many companies now do, and you can just pull calls, why would you still do role plays? Why wouldn't you just coach based on calls? You should do both. And the
Yeah.
reason is with a role play, you can create a focus for exactly what you want to improve upon. In your day-to-day calls, first of all, 90% of them are going to be leaving voicemails or 1 to 2 minute conversations. Getting those meaty discovery calls to really dig into, it's hard to find, honestly. So role plays are opportunity to say, hey, you've never had the opportunity to come up against someone on pricing. Let's really just focus on that. And we all know that the most frightening thing about being a salesperson is when you get asked a question you don't know the answer to, or you feel like you don't know your knowledge, your product knowledge very well. This also just gives you confidence because, to your point, you're practicing. It's like batting practice. And
Yeah.
we don't just use it in onboarding, we use it, throughout. And we try to make it not a punishment either. So I think where organizations can go wrong is so and so is on a performance improvement plan. Let's make them do some role plays to sharpen their skills. Well, at that point, the process isn't a safe space anymore. And that sounds cheesy, but one of the reasons to have a trainer do this versus your manager is you want to be safe to fail. It's a safe to fail environment.
No, I agree 100%. And for myself, you know, I've made that same kind of mistake you were talking about earlier, where I just would jump into the sales part of it instead of just trying to create that rapport and be a friend, like you said, get them to like you type of thing.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn that. But I also like the idea of, you know, what you said, where when you're in the job, you don't always get those same opportunities for those surprise situations that you're not prepared for, right? You're just doing the day-to-day stuff. So you're right. I think there's not a lot of opportunity for coaching in that case. But this forces you to be in that situation as close as possible as a real situation. So that makes a lot of sense. So now you're prepared for all those unexpected
Right.
situations.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny, one of the other things that I do is coaching for when someone's going to give a presentation or, a demo or something like that. And I've really encouraged not just our junior salespeople, but our more senior salespeople and our leaders that if you're about to present or speak, it's not enough to just work on the deck and feel like that will teach you your material and just kind of silently read your deck. You have to practice out loud. It's a muscle memory thing.
Yeah.
And so I always give the option of, hey, are you, you're about to do a webcast. Let me hear your material. Let's talk through it and give some coaching. And I think it's one of those things we coach on so many other skills, but communication, which is what all of us are doing in all of our jobs, whether we're good at it or not, we tend to give that kind of the back seat. And I think it's because of that whole soft skills are soft, hard skills are difficult. I mean, I hate even the term soft skills, but we've yet to come up with better. Unless maybe some people you've interviewed have had better terminology I could use.
Well, I mean, sometimes they say people skills, and the latest I saw a post on LinkedIn, they're calling it human skills.
Okay.
Comparing human skills versus like AI. So human skills, we need skills that humans can do that AI can't do. So
Yes.
different ways to phrase it.
And what that makes me think of is, so these sales development reps, just the way most companies work, this tends to be someone who's just out of college. It might be their first job. And if you think about who that pool is, so your Gen Zers, your millennials, in many cases, these are people who have not been on the phone in their life. So I think about my teenage years, and I'm dating myself a little bit, but talking on the phone for hours was a big part of it. So I'm a good talker. These guys are just texting. They're on Slack, they're on WhatsApp, and they don't have the natural communication skills from practice that some of their older peers do. So they're coming in at a deficit. It was really a bit of a shock when, and this team is not like that, but other teams that I've worked with, they can barely leave a voicemail. And it's something that is so easy for Gen X because they did it. So I think that's something to consider too. And human skills for this generation that's been in quarantine for a formative year, they're going to enter the workforce and not know how to share an update in a meeting or give their introduction. And yet we would never think to train them on that. It's very funny to me.
Yeah. No, it's true. My daughter is 18, and she's actually very outgoing and with her friends a lot and not really shy. But she applied for a job, and she was kind of going back and forth with the hiring manager. And I said, just drive up there and go talk to her. And she was like, can I just text her? I'm like, no, don't text her. She'll really appreciate you talking to her face to face. And she's like, okay, so you're right. I mean, even someone who's an outgoing person, this younger generation, they still struggle. They're so used to texting, like you said.
Yeah.
So they need those skills. And I always thought that, these, like you said, the people skills or soft skills, interacting and communicating with each other should be taught in schools, because parents don't always have the skill to teach those skills to their children. But if it was taught,
that's such a great idea.
The kids would get along better. Maybe there'd be less, crime and issues because people can communicate and get their emotions off their chest and type of thing.
It's amazing. A friend of mine has a preteen kid, and they've been working on some behavioral issues, as I'm sure all preteens are. Poor things. It gets better, I promise. And they had this kind of bingo card of emotions on their, and it's like helping this kid to identify their emotions. That's another thing that, we're not taught. You're feeling something. Why are you feeling it? Sit with that for a moment. What does that mean? How should you respond to that? There's self-awareness and self-control, and being able to sit with your emotions and know, okay, I'm feeling anxious. Is it because I just had too much coffee, or is something worrying me? How do I address that? It seems so basic, but people don't know how to recognize their emotions or the emotions of others. And then we get into miscommunications. And I always feel as well that men are at a deficit because it's not socialized from a young age like it is with women to be able to be in touch with your emotions, to be able to communicate. So then we start dating, and that's where collisions happen, because you have one person who's been communicating their feelings from a young age, and you have another person who's told that that's bad, don't do that. And so, of course, we look at men and say, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? Because they don't know how to say it. And I'm generalizing, of course, but
no, it's true. I think myself growing up, the only emotion was, I'm going to punch you in the face. That was because you watch all the movies. That's what the guy does. He just punches him in the face. He never cries. He never, nothing else. No. That's it. So, but I think it's good though that people are talking about this and learning more, because my son, he's 7, and we've been trying to help him understand his emotions and learn because sometimes he'll just get upset or frustrated or cry, and you say, do you know why you're crying? How do you feel? And he's like, I don't know. He just doesn't know.
Yeah.
I think no one ever taught me that. There was no class on that. My parents, teachers never taught me how to deal with my emotions. So I think that's super important. And I had one more point I was going to make is, so he has this thing, it's called Mightier. It's pretty cool. He puts a little armband on, and it measures his heart rate, and it's connected to a video game that he plays. And he plays the video game, and when he starts to get frustrated or upset, his heart rate goes up, and it will flash on the screen. All right, it's time to breathe now. So
what is this called?
It's called Mightier.
Oh my goodness, that sounds amazing.
So we've been trying that, and it's been working, because he'll be playing the game, and then all of a sudden he'll stop and go.
Oh my goodness.
So it's helping him be aware of his emotions, but also helping him here's what I can do to calm myself down in those situations.
Yeah. I mean, I think about, so I used to work a lot with call center reps. And again, God bless, it's the hardest job. It's so, maybe not the hardest job, but it's a very difficult job. And I can imagine how if, a customer service rep had something like that as they're going through calls, that would be so effective. And I'm sure someone's listening like, we do, it's called this. But, because I would always say, if you've had three bad calls in a row, just, by complete luck, you've just had three jerks. How likely is that next call to be good? It was
Yeah.
something that was a bit controversial to say to managers who really want them to just be churning out the dials. But I would say that 5-minute break that will reset them and get them in a more positive mindset is well worth, because the two calls they would have taken in those 5 minutes are not going to go well if they just had three people in a row screaming at them. So, for customer service reps, I think it's really important to be aware of where you're at, because you're
Yeah.
taking in a lot of animosity, and it's hard to just like brush that off like you have to, because no one's calling a call center to say, I just wanted to say I love your product and everything's going great. They're just getting
Yeah.
yelled at all day.
The whole purpose is customer service, right? And so, yeah, I think, they get focused, like you said, on this, next call, next call, next call, but you're defeating the whole purpose of having someone there to answer the phone in the first place.
Right. Yeah. The human skills. It's such. I think you're really onto it. If they should teach it much younger in schools, and I think in corporations. There are stats tied to companies that have emotionally intelligent employees make XYZ more revenue, but
Yeah.
it's still really hard to prove out. If you're trying to say to, the head of sales, I want to do a 4-hour workshop on emotional intelligence or empathy, they're going to be like, okay, but how much money are we losing from them being away from being off the phones? So it's tough because you want to have really impactful and valuable training, but that's quick, that's digestible. But sometimes you do have to just take a step back and say, yes, it is worth those 4 hours. I am going to have you take the training. So it's that getting the leadership's green light is so hard to do.
I've heard that from a lot of learning and development professionals. They
Yeah.
struggle with that, but there's so much evidence out there. I mean, I've been reading so much about it. There's reports and reports and reports that talk about, like you said, emotional intelligence and psychological safety and good communication skills, and up to 30 to 40% increase in profitability. I mean, that's
Yeah.
huge.
That
30 to
is
40%. It's not like
totally
5%.
huge.
So that's
Yeah.
all you got to do is invest in your people, and they'll be happier.
Yes.
They'll work harder for you. They even will work for less money.
Oh,
Uh,
100%. Yes. Absolutely. You'll have less attrition. I mean, there's so many things to tie it to. But I think the challenge that learning and development specialists find is, behavioral and skill change, but especially behavioral change takes time.
yeah,
You're
yeah,
not going to have one workshop and see that profitability increase.
yeah,
So there's kind of two problems there. Number one, leadership, especially in a sales organization, is used to seeing instant ROI. So I'm always getting asked, like, what metrics are your training tied to? And that's fair, but sometimes it takes time for that culture to shift and things to change. It also takes a follow up, which usually should be from their manager. So they went to a workshop on conflict resolution. Okay, great. But if they don't use any of it or talk about it, then it's forgotten. And so what really should be happening is the manager should, in their next one-on-one, what did you learn? Talk to me about that. How are you going to use that? What are 3 ways that you're going to be different as a result of that training? And be involved in that conversation, that process. But it's hard to get managers that are A, good managers, and B, willing to spend time coaching. It's something that always falls to the back seat, I find.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think you have to, changing your behavior is not easy. I mean, anyone
No.
who's ever been on a diet or tried to go to the gym on a regular
Oh
basis.
my God. Good analogy.
So, yeah, it takes a lot of time and effort, and you have to be willing to change that behavior. You can't just
Yeah.
force it on your employees. But hopefully, the more and more employees that are seeing the benefit of changing their behavior, they influence the other employees. They say, "Oh, yeah, I'm doing great. You should try this." And
Yeah. And I think there's a misconception about training, especially if it's again, like a human skills training. I'm going to use that instead of soft skills now. That it's, if you're at a senior level, you already must be great at this. And sometimes the opposite is true. You've been working primarily with people who report to you. So they're going to behave a certain way to you. Yeah. And you're going to have these blinders that it takes a professional coming in and working with you. I mean, that's why there's so many executive coaches, and there are some really good ones. I mean, it's important that leadership take a step back and say, I'm not going to just tell my employees to go to this workshop. I'm going to attend. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to participate. That really makes your employees see, okay, well, then it's okay for me to do that too.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I'm going to ask you one more question, but this has been really awesome. It's been great.
Yes, such a great conversation.
So the last question is just kind of a summary of everything. So what do you think would be the key takeaways or the key message you would like to give to our viewers and listeners out there from this conversation?
I would say it's use the tools at your disposal, but make coaching a priority. And the best tools you have are your own employees. They just need the support of a trainer, a learning and development specialist to guide them in giving that focus. So it's use who you have and use your learning and development team in coaching conversations, not just training. Number two would be, if you're coaching, the first question should always be to the person you're coaching, which is, how do you feel it went? What do you think went well? This not only allows them to take a moment to reflect, catch their breath, but it's showing that, they're building their self-awareness. You can tell if there's a problem if they don't share anything that, you've noticed. And then I guess the final thing would be, role play is not just for onboarding. It's for practical training and tying concepts together. And I think it shouldn't just be for sales and customer service. I think you could use it for a lot of other things as well. And I would suggest looking up improv rules and embedding them into your role play practice.
I like that. I like that very much. So, I like what you said, that use your best tools, and your best tools are your employees. And so, keep those tools sharp. And using improv is a great way, not only just for sales, but just for general communication skills.
Oh my God. Take an improv class. It's life-changing. It really is. You should take one. Anyone, I mean, the general you.
For sure. And the last point you made, I agree with 100% as well, is that, you're not coaching the person is really coaching themselves.
Yes.
That's where you get the best outcome. And I believe that. That's
such a good way to put it, Matt. I think I'm going to use that because it makes it seem less like teachers coming down on you, or, your manager. You're coaching yourself. I'm just there to guide that learning.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Kelly. It was a pleasure today. That was really great.
So much fun.
Well, that was Kelly Dowd, learning and development consultant from OneSpan. And my name is Matthew again. This was The Interchange.